What happens when Hollywood's most arrogant talk show host tries to humiliate a living legend on live television? Well, you're about to find out because Chuck Norris just delivered the most epic takedown in late-night TV history, and Jimmy Kimmel got exactly what he deserved. This is the untold story of how one of the most respected martial artists in the world ended up walking off set after exposing Kimmel for the fake he really is. If you want to see how a real man handles a bully, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because this story will blow your mind. The tension was obvious from the moment Chuck Norris walked onto the Jimmy Kimmel live set. While the audience erupted in genuine applause for the martial arts icon, Kimmel sat behind his desk with that trademark smirk that screamed trouble. Chuck, dressed in his signature black shirt and jeans, moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove to anyone, especially not to some comedian who made his living mocking others. "Ladies and gentlemen, Chuck Norris," Kimmel announced, his voice dripping with barely concealed mockery. "The man, the myth, the internet meme." Chuck settled into the guest chair, his steel blue eyes never leaving Kimmel's face. There was something in his expression that should have warned the host to tread carefully, but Kimmel had never been known for his wisdom. "So, Chuck," Kimmel began, leaning back in his chair like he owned the world, "I have to ask about all these Chuck Norris facts floating around the internet. You know, Chuck Norris doesn't do push-ups, he pushes the earth down. That kind of thing. How does it feel to be a walking punchline?" The audience shifted uncomfortably. Even they could sense the disrespect in Kimmel's tone. Chuck's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained calm and measured. "I've never considered myself a punchline, Jimmy. I've spent my life dedicated to martial arts, helping kids through my foundation, and entertaining people through my films. If that's funny to you, then maybe we have different definitions of humor." Kimmel's smirk widened. "Oh, come on, Chuck. You can't tell me you take yourself that seriously. I mean, your movies weren't exactly Oscar material, were they? Walker, Texas Ranger was basically a joke that ran for 8 years. The comment hit like a slap across the face. Chuck's eyes flashed with something dangerous, but he kept his composure. "Those projects meant something to people, Jimmy. Walker, Texas Ranger taught values, showed good triumphing over evil. It gave families something they could watch together. I'm proud of that work." "Values," Kimmel repeated, air quotes and all. "Right. Like roundhouse kicking every problem away. Very realistic. Very valuable." He turned to his audience with an exaggerated eye roll. "I guess when you're Chuck Norris, subtlety is for weaklings, right, folks?" The audience's laughter was forced, uncomfortable. They could feel the tension building, and it wasn't the fun kind that made for good television. This was the kind that made you want to look away. Chuck leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a tone that made everyone in the studio pay attention. "You know what, Jimmy? I came here tonight thinking I'd have a conversation with a professional, someone who understood that respect goes both ways. But I can see now that you're more interested in cheap shots than actual dialogue." "Cheap shots?" Kimmel's voice rose with mock indignation. "I'm just asking questions, Chuck. Isn't that what talk shows are for? Or are you too sensitive for a little comedy? Maybe the internet got it wrong. Maybe Chuck Norris facts should be about how easily his feelings get hurt." The studio fell silent. Even Kimmel's band stopped their usual background noodling. Chuck's hands, which had been resting calmly on the chair arms, slowly formed fists. Not in a threatening way, but in the way of a man who was reaching the end of his patience. "Let me tell you something about sensitivity, Jimmy," Chuck said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of discipline and self-control. "I've been in this business for over 40 years. I've taken criticism from critics, from fans, from Hollywood executives. I've been knocked down in the ring more times than I can count. But there's a difference between criticism and disrespect. There's a difference between humor and bullying." Kimmel waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, please, spare me the lecture. You're on a comedy show, Chuck. If you can't handle a few jokes, Maybe you should have stayed home and practiced your kicks. A few jokes? Chuck's voice remained level, but there was steel beneath it. You've spent the last 5 minutes doing everything you can to make me look foolish. You've mocked my career, my values, and my character, all while hiding behind that desk and calling it comedy. The camera operators were having a field day. This was the kind of unscripted television that networks dreamed of, but everyone in the studio could feel that something was about to happen, something that would change everything. Kimmel, either oblivious to or deliberately ignoring the warning signs, decided to push even further. Look, Chuck, I get that you're upset, but maybe instead of getting all philosophical about respect and values, you should just accept that your 15 minutes of fame ended about 20 years ago. The only reason people remember you now is because of internet memes. You're basically a walking nostalgia act. That was the moment. The moment when Chuck Norris's legendary patience finally reached its limit. He stood up slowly, his movements controlled and deliberate. The audience held its breath. "You want to know what's really funny, Jimmy?" Chuck said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the studio. "You sit behind that desk every night, making jokes about people who actually accomplished something with their lives. You mock actors, athletes, politicians, anyone who's actually put themselves out there and taken risks. But what have you done? What have you built? What have you created that matters?" Kimmel's smirk was starting to crack around the edges. "I've built a successful television show. I entertain millions of people every night. You tear people down for laughs," Chuck corrected. "There's a difference between entertainment and destruction. You've built your career on making others look small so you can feel big. That's not entertainment, Jimmy, that's just sad." The studio was dead silent now. Even the crew had stopped moving. This wasn't going according to anyone's script, and everyone knew they were witnessing something unprecedented. Kimmel's face flushed red, and for the first time since the interview began, his cocky composure started to crack. But instead of backing down like any reasonable person would, he doubled down on his arrogance. "Oh, that's rich coming from you," Kimmel shot back, his voice getting louder and more defensive. "At least I don't pretend to be some kind of moral authority while starring in B-grade action movies. At least I don't walk around acting like I'm some kind of philosopher warrior, when really I'm just an aging action star desperately clinging to relevance." Chuck's eyes narrowed. The insult wasn't just about him anymore, it was about everything he stood for, everything he'd worked to build. "You know what your problem is, Jimmy? You've never stood for anything in your life. You've never put yourself on the line for a principle. You've never had to face real adversity or real consequences, so you sit in your comfortable chair and tear down people who have." "Real adversity?" Kimmel laughed, but it sounded forced and hollow. "What adversity? Making cheesy movies? Teaching karate? Give me a break, Chuck. You're not exactly Martin Luther King here." The comparison was offensive on multiple levels, and Chuck's voice took on an edge that made everyone in the studio uncomfortable. "I've worked with underprivileged kids for decades, Jimmy. I've helped build schools, funded programs for at-risk youth, supported veterans and their families. I've used whatever platform I had to try to make a difference. What have you done besides mock people from behind a desk?" Kimmel was clearly rattled now, but his ego wouldn't let him admit defeat. "I donate to charity too, Chuck. Lots of celebrities do. That doesn't make you special. That doesn't make your terrible movies any less terrible or your ridiculous tough guy act any less ridiculous." "Tough guy act?" Chuck repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "You think this is an act?" The camera caught every micro-expression on both men's faces. Chuck's controlled fury, Kimmel's growing panic masked by aggression. The audience was completely silent now, sensing that they were witnessing something that had gone way beyond entertainment. "Look," Kimmel said, trying to regain control of the situation. "I think we're getting a little too serious here. This is supposed to be fun. Maybe we should talk about something else. How about we discuss your age? You're what, 80-something now? Still trying to convince people you can fight? It was the wrong thing to say. Completely, utterly wrong. Chuck's hands unclenched, and somehow that was more intimidating than when they were fists. He spoke with the calm certainty of someone who had nothing left to prove and nothing left to lose. You want to know if I can still fight, Jimmy? You want to test that theory? The studio went dead quiet. Even the cameras seemed to stop moving. Kimmel's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard, but his mouth kept running. Are you threatening me on my own show? Kimmel tried to sound outraged, but his voice cracked slightly. Are you actually threatening violence on national television? I'm not threatening anything, Chuck replied calmly. I'm simply responding to your question. You asked if I could still fight. I'm asking if you'd like to find out. No cameras, no audience. Just you and me settling this like men. The producer in the booth was probably having a heart attack. This was live television, and their star was being challenged to a fight by Chuck Norris. Kimmel looked around desperately, as if seeking help from his staff, but everyone was frozen. This is insane, Kimmel said, his voice rising to nearly a shout. You can't just challenge people to fights because they hurt your feelings. This isn't the Wild West, Chuck. Grow up. Hurt my feelings? Chuck's voice remained eerily calm. Jimmy, you've spent the last 10 minutes trying to humiliate me on national television. You've mocked my career, my values, my character, and my age. You've done everything possible to make me look like a fool. And now you want to talk about growing up? It's comedy, Kimmel protested weakly. It's just jokes. You're taking this way too seriously. No, Jimmy, this is who you really are. This is what you do every single night. You bring people onto your show, and then you attack them for your own amusement. You hide behind the word comedy like it gives you permission to be cruel. But comedy is supposed to bring people together, not tear them apart. Kimmel's mask was completely off now. The fake smile, the practiced charm, all of it was gone. What remained was just an angry, insecure man who had been called out in front of millions of people. You know what, Chuck? You're absolutely right. I do mock people. I mock has-been action stars who think they're more important than they are. I mock self-righteous celebrities who lecture people about values while living in Hollywood mansions. I mock people like you because, frankly, you deserve to be mocked. The audience gasped. Some people actually stood up, ready to leave. This had crossed every line of professional conduct, and everyone knew it. Chuck nodded slowly as if Kimmel had just confirmed everything he suspected. There it is, the real Jimmy Kimmel, everyone. No jokes, no punchlines, just pure nastiness. This is what passes for entertainment in your world. My world? Kimmel was practically screaming now. My world is the real world, Chuck. Not some fantasy land where good guys always win and problems get solved with roundhouse kicks. I deal with reality. I point out when people are ridiculous, and you, my friend, are absolutely ridiculous. Chuck stood there for a moment, taking it all in. The audience, the cameras, the crew, all watching to see what would happen next. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried more authority than all of Kimmel's shouting. You're right. About one thing, Jimmy. This is the real world. And in the real world, there are consequences for treating people with disrespect. In the real world, bullies eventually meet someone who won't back down. He started to move toward Kimmel's desk, not aggressively, but with the purposeful stride of someone who had made a decision. Kimmel's eyes went wide, and he actually pushed his chair back from the desk. Security! Kimmel yelled, his voice cracking with panic. Get security in here right now! But Chuck wasn't moving aggressively. He simply walked to the front of Kimmel's desk and stood there, his presence filling the entire studio. When he spoke, his voice was calm, measured, and more intimidating than any scream could have been. I'm not going to hurt you, Jimmy. You're not worth it. But I am going to make sure everyone sees exactly who you are. Chuck turned to face the cameras directly, speaking to the millions of viewers watching at home. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just witnessed something that happens on this show every single night. A man who makes his living by tearing others down, who hides behind comedy to justify cruelty, who thinks that having a television show gives him the right to humiliate his guests. Kimmel was frantically gesturing to his producers, but they seemed frozen, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let this historic moment play out. Chuck continued, his voice carrying the weight of decades of experience and wisdom. Jimmy Kimmel invited me here tonight not to have a conversation, not to entertain his audience, but to make me into a punchline. He wanted to turn a martial artist, who has dedicated his life to helping others, into a joke for his own amusement. But here's what he didn't count on: I don't break that easily. "Cut to commercial!" Kimmel shouted at his booth. "Cut to commercial right now!" But Chuck wasn't finished. He looked directly at Kimmel, his steel blue eyes boring into the host's soul. "You want to know what real strength is, Jimmy? It's not being able to fight, though I certainly can. It's not being famous, though I've had my share of that. Real strength is standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Real strength is treating people with respect, even when they don't deserve it. Real strength is being a man of character." Kimmel's face was purple with rage and embarrassment. "Get him off my stage! Get him out of here!" Chuck smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had just won a battle without throwing a single punch. "I'm leaving, Jimmy. But not because you're throwing me out. I'm leaving because I have too much respect for myself to stay in the same room as someone who has none for others." He turned to walk away, but then stopped and looked back at Kimmel one more time. "You know what the saddest part of all this is? You could have been better. You could have used your platform to build people up instead of tearing them down. You could have been someone worth respecting, but you chose this instead." "I don't need your respect," Kimmel screamed. "I don't need respect from some washed-up action star who thinks he's better than everyone else." Chuck shook his head sadly. "That's where you're wrong, Jimmy. Everyone needs respect. Everyone deserves basic human dignity. But you've spent so long denying it to others that you've forgotten what it looks like." The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. Some were recording with their phones, knowing they were witnessing television history. Others were simply stunned by the raw honesty of the moment. "You want to know what a real Chuck Norris fact is?" Chuck asked, his voice carrying to every corner of the studio. "Chuck Norris doesn't need to put others down to feel good about himself. Chuck Norris doesn't hide behind comedy to justify cruelty. Chuck Norris treats people with dignity because that's what real men do." He started walking toward the exit, his head held high, his dignity intact. But Kimmel, in his desperation and humiliation, made one final fatal mistake. "Run away, Chuck!" Kimmel yelled after him. "Run away like the coward you really are. Go back to your ranch and pretend you're still relevant." Chuck stopped dead in his tracks. The studio held its breath. Slowly, deliberately, he turned around and walked back to Kimmel's desk. His voice, when he spoke, was quieter than it had been all night, but it carried more power than thunder. "I've been called many things in my life, Jimmy. I've been called tough, stubborn, old-fashioned, even difficult. But no one, and I mean no one, has ever called me a coward. Not my instructors, not my opponents, not my critics, and certainly not some pathetic excuse for a comedian who wouldn't last 5 seconds in any real confrontation." Kimmel's bravado crumbled completely. Face to face with Chuck Norris, with nowhere to hide, he realized he had pushed way too far. I didn't mean," he stammered. "Yes, you did," Chuck cut him off. "You meant every word, just like you meant every insult, every put-down, every attempt to humiliate me tonight. The only difference is now you're scared because you realize you're not safe behind that desk anymore." Chuck placed both hands on Kimmel's desk and leaned forward. his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I'm going to walk out of here now, Jimmy. And you're going to sit there and think about what kind of man you really want to be. Because this, what you've shown everyone tonight, this isn't comedy. This isn't entertainment. This is just a broken person trying to break others to feel better about himself." He straightened up and looked directly into the main camera one final time. "To everyone watching at home, remember this. Respect isn't something you can demand. It's something you earn. And you earn it by how you treat others, especially when you think no one is watching." Chuck Norris walked off the Jimmy Kimmel Live set, with his head held high, leaving behind a host who had been completely exposed, an audience that had witnessed something unprecedented, and millions of viewers who would never forget the night. Chuck Norris showed everyone what real strength looked like. Kimmel sat there in stunned silence, his show in ruins, his reputation in tatters, realizing too late that he had picked a fight with the wrong man. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of his humiliation, because sometimes the real entertainment isn't in the script, it's in the truth. So there you have it, the untold story of how Jimmy Kimmel got exactly what he deserved when he tried to bully a legend. Chuck Norris didn't need to throw a single punch to completely destroy Kimmel's credibility and expose him for the fraud he really is. Make sure you subscribe for more incredible stories like this one, and let me know in the comments. Do you think Chuck Norris should have stayed and fought, or was walking away the ultimate power move?